Today we're going to dive in. We're going to demystify foundation grants. We're going to talk about how to secure funding from major private foundations. And this is as LeVar would say, don't take my word for it. We have excellent experts here. And so can't wait to introduce you to them in a moment. Very quick housekeeping. This event is 1.0 CFRE credits approved. At the end of the session, complete our survey. We'll confirm the attendance. Any questions you have after, we will get it to as many as we can, and we'll ask our panelists. So we'll have a really great opportunity to do that if we can get through everything. Quick intros. As I mentioned, my name is Patrick. I'm lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO of FreeWill, alongside my wonderful co-founder, Jenny. We are the largest planned giving and estate planning solution in the world. 2,200 leading nonprofits featured in all sorts of wonderful newspapers, et cetera, et cetera. FreeWill team is about 200. We have raised $12.3 billion in capital B for nonprofits to date, and more than 5 centuries of combined fundraising experience and expertise. But we're bringing even more expertise to you today. I'm going through the intros relatively quickly so we can spend as much time as we can with our experts. So one gift is we're going to send Meditations for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman to 20 people as a gift. Some of you may have gotten this several months ago and people loved it. So we're doing it again. So we're so happy to support you here. Make a note at the end of the session. We will drop a survey in the chat if you would like a copy, and we'll go from there. Also, other quick housekeeping pieces before we dive in. We've asked you how your week is going, and generally pretty solid. A little bit down from last week, but overall feeling quite good. So that's good. A lot of sunshine, but also, taking a look at how people are feeling about their goals. Actually, markedly down, which is really interesting because it's been a record time for the stock market. And so actually, and since the last webinar, we've seen Giving USA data come out that shows very strong giving last year. So I'm a little bit surprised by this. If anyone has any thoughts on why it's gone down from a few weeks ago, please put that in the chat. All right, so now we're gonna get right to our expert panelists, and I'm so glad to welcome 3 incredible women. First, we're going to talk about Molly, who's a program officer at Gerstner Philanthropies. This is a charitable foundation of Louis Gerstner and his family. Each year, the foundation awards more than $40 million in grants to advance everything from biomedical research to expanding education, to supporting environmental initiatives, to providing emergency assistance. So all over the place. Wide range of awesome things. Molly oversees the emergency cash assistance and emergency grant making programs. Since joining in 2019, she's led the design and implementation of responsive grant strategies. She manages a portfolio of exceeding 15 million annually, partners with more than 35 organizations across the country. Before this, she spent several years in admin and operation roles in the private sector, and she brings a perspective grounded in direct high trust collaboration with nonprofit partners. So Molly, we're so happy to have you here. Thank you for joining. Molly, before we move on to Caitlin, what's making you happy this week?
I think similar to some people in the chat, I just came back from traveling last week, so I had a great time, but happy to be home.
Happy to be home. Amazing. Yeah. Our next expert is Caitlin Orth. Caitlin is the Ruth at the Ruth and How Launders Charitable Trust, where she is the executive director. This is a private family foundation trust in Herndon, Virginia. They focus on addressing the root causes of hunger and homelessness through the provision of multi-year general operating grants. Thank you so much for doing that, by the way, to nonprofit partners across the US and around the world. Before this, she was at So Others Might Eat, one of DC's largest nonprofits that provides daily emergency services, affordable housing, and clinical services. Before that, she was a grants manager at the Philip Graham Fund, a name that might be familiar to you as the former publisher of the Washington Post. She's been a presidential scholar, and she graduated from Holy Cross in Worcester, as I think a couple of folks here might have done, and has an MA from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Lives in Maryland with her husband and 2 kids. Welcome, Caitlin. Caitlin, what's making you happy today?
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you all. What's making me happy today is just spending time with my family in this beautiful weather, steamy weather that we're having in DC, but beautiful weather nonetheless.
Amazing. Well, so glad to have you here. So Molly and Caitlin are representing the grant making expertise, and the grant seeking expertise is coming from Danielle Woodhouse Johnson, who, by the way, Danielle, my colleague Mustafa was just telling me so many nice things about you. So he says hello. Um, and she is the director of partnerships of the National Association of Community Health Centers. So she helps a diverse range of stakeholders in the community health center space create shared value and partner effectively. Her work supports efforts to promote efficient, high quality, comprehensive healthcare that is accessible, culturally and linguistically competent, community directed, and patient centered for all. She brings a huge cross sector experience working on managing funding across grassroots to global nonprofits. She's led successful proposal bids to federal agencies, private foundations, corporate partners, worked through the whole funding life cycle. So much to say about her. She's also the founder of the Oasis Alliance, a DC-based nonprofit that helps healing-centered spaces for trauma survivors. As a small nonprofit leader, Danielle developed and stewarded partnerships that helped grow the organization all the way from concept to impact. She has a BA in Foreign Affairs from the University of Virginia. She's a senior Atlantic Fellows at George Washington University. She's a Gates Foundation goalkeeper. She's a former Peace Corps volunteer. We could go on and on. She lives in Northern Virginia, her husband and 2 kids. So many amazing things to say. By the way, I only told you half of what's amazing about these incredible women. So, and that's because we want to hear from them. So we're going to dive right in. I'm going to pull my screen down so we can get to some questions. And feel free, by the way, to add questions in the chat the whole time. We'll pull those in as we can. So first, let's dive in here. And Caitlin, the first question is for you, if you don't mind. A lot of things that people asked us in advance of this is really trying to better understand the perspective of foundations. Foundations can have very different approaches to funding. Some are invite only, others have discretionary grants, some have open application cycles. For a nonprofit trying to navigate this, it's a little mysterious, right? Can you help break down what the different models look like and why you as a funder might choose something and what nonprofits should keep in mind as they think about this?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks so much, Patrick. So I'll start with what we do at the Ruth and Hal Launders Charitable Trust. And since we are on the smaller side in terms of our annual grant making budget, we are invitation only. So that means that myself, along with our team and our trustees, we're looking and sourcing nonprofits all across the US and around the world that align with our mission. We also have a discretionary cycle. So that means that each of our trustees has a discretionary grant fund that they can invite any organization to apply that may not be aligned with our mission, but that is a registered 501c3 or has a 501c3 status here in the US. So invite only means that it's outwardly facing. So the invitation is going to flow from a member of the staff, the foundation staff, or from one of the trustees. Same with discretionary based. And then open invitation, that's when I was at the Philip L. Graham Fund, that's what we did because our grant budget was much larger than what we have at the Launders Trust. And the reason why a funder might have an open invitation process is because they have more dollars to give away and they're looking to source as many organizations that are qualified and eligible to apply. So they'll have really specific criteria and guidelines on their website for each of those open application cycles. And that's where Grant Assistant will come into play and be very helpful because as you look for and source the list of funders that might align with what your mission area is as the nonprofit seeking funding, they'll have that description to note, is it an open invitation cycle? And they'll also note when those application cycles will open and when they will close. And then if it's a closed, which is a discretionary or an invitation only, they'll also note that as well. And one more thing, just to follow up on how to break through that entry, if you're aligned with a funder that's invite only or discretionary based, that's where really your relationship mapping comes into play. So leaning on your board members or staff members to reach out to anyone who may be in leadership or on staff at that foundation to see if they can broker an introduction. You can always try cold emailing or cold contacting on LinkedIn or via the Contact Us feature on a foundation's website. But like the job search, you may not be as successful in that regard.
That's great. I think a lot of people have that secret question in the back of their minds. Like, yes, it's invite only, but how might I get an invite? So thank you so much for answering that. Danielle, you've been successful in a lot of these different types of grants. From your experience working on proposals and BD at an international nonprofit, how did you figure out which foundations were the right fit for you, especially when the landscape feels unclear or some of it's invite only? How did you move from sort of being out in the cold to winning so much funding?
It is definitely tough. In this environment, you've really got to think outside the box, but systematically. I know for me, cold calling always felt really spammy and unnatural, and it's not really effective. And you kind of have to treat prospecting more like matchmaking than fundraising. So the first thing I would say is get crystal clear on your value proposition. You have to think kind of in different terms, not just what you do, but why it matters in the current moment to that particular funder that you're looking at. It helps to filter out funders who aren't really aligned and to kind of surface those who might be quietly investing in your space, right? You could take a short list of funders that you're interested in once you've done your research, look at their board affiliations and their grantee lists to kind of spot some trends and entry points that maybe aren't obvious from their public websites. And then I think this was previously stated, but doing a networking map and looking at your existing board, your staff, and peer organizations to sort of uncover any warm connections that you may have. It's really tedious and not a lot of folks want to take the time to do that, but it really pays off. So in many cases, there's someone that may be presented at a conference, someone who collaborated on a project, has a LinkedIn overlap, and those ties really help us get past that invisible wall we feel in this process. Like I said, it's really tedious, but it's really important. And then I would say next, prioritize your insight-led outreach. So it works really much better than a cold call. So when I say that, I mean lead with curiosity, right? Ask a question about recent work that was done, or offer an insight or an article or something that kind of connects you to their mission or to a challenge that that foundation cares about. You really want them to see you as a peer and as a partner and not a grantee. And the last thing I'll say is relationship building takes a lot of time. Sometimes we want things to turn over right away. And I think in some of the larger organizations I've worked with, they've invested a lot of time in capture, meaning giving yourself time to cultivate those relationships before the opportunity presents itself, something that we have to accept. And so high-level staff at your organization and your board should really develop a habit of creating small moments for engagement, like inviting program officers to your roundtables or asking them for feedback on an idea, or even introducing them to a partner that will benefit them that has nothing to do with you. You kind of have to kind of provide value outside of your own personal objectives. And that way, when that opportunity really does present itself, you're the first person, the first organization they're thinking of. That's what I'd say.
That's great. Super helpful. I really like that framing of adding value. I think so often fundees think it's a one-directional relationship where they're, but I'm sure Caitlin and Molly will tell you, funders don't matter if there aren't implementing nonprofits, right? And so they're hoping to create impact in the world, and you are the route there. And so making sure you feel that way. Danielle, one follow-up question is, you've won some fundraising dollars from big names funders like the Gates Foundation. What did you do to help your proposal stand out in what I assume was a crowded field?
Right. Well, I went back to the team that has really had a lot of success with the Gates Foundation that I worked with at my time at my former position. And there are a couple of things with that team that I saw that helped to cultivate increasing support over time. Number one, the team really understood the foundation's priorities and the pain points that they were experiencing, and they connected their skill sets directly with the solutions that Gates was looking for. And then they made those pain points the top level points in their proposal. So they really spoke directly to it. They were laser focused on matching their staff and their expertise to the stated priorities of the foundation. So the foundation, like I said before, has to really believe that funding your work is the best way that they can meet their own objectives, right? They have to see you as the missing puzzle piece. And I think that's where you'll find the most success. It really needs to be a true fit. And then another thing, if you're lucky enough to get shortlisted or invited to discuss your proposal further with them, showcasing a positive team dynamic was another thing that was surfaced. And your teammates as individuals, because during that call, they're going to see how you work together. You're going to have to work together for the lifetime of the grant. And so one of the directors that I work with told me that she overheard that one of the reasons we were selected was because they saw how connected and seamlessly they worked as a team during that initial call, and it really kind of drew them in. So that's another point that I don't think is commonly talked about.
That is a great point. And I think one that's really under discussed, how like people want to spend time with people they like and enjoy being around. And so if you are expecting to have 9 more calls post funding, they want to enjoy, people are going to be drawn, whether or not it's conscious or unconscious, right? But both of those things play out. Molly, on the funder side, what makes one of these proposals stand out to you? Are there specific things that you're really looking for when you're reviewing an application?
Absolutely. While different funders are obviously going to prioritize different things, for us, there are 3 elements that we look for across all of the programs that we fund. And first, it's just that the proposal really makes a strong case to tie the proposed project to our foundation's goals. And I think this really speaks to what Danielle just shared about matchmaking with a funder. The most compelling proposals that I have seen go beyond just surface level references to our mission and really illustrate how the work aligns using concrete examples like client stories or case studies where they highlight things mentioned in our program guidelines or really connect them to the stated end goals of our program. Second, I would say visible leadership commitment to the proposed project is critical for us. Highlighting key staff members' related experience to this work can be a great way to preview this in the proposal. And we also place, significant weight on whether senior leaders at the organization can clearly articulate how this specific project fits into the organization's strategic priorities overall when we have these kinds of follow-up conversations or site visits post-proposal. And finally, collaboration is really key for us. So we look for organizations that are engaged with other nonprofits, whether that be through coalitions or even on informal referral networks and cross-sector partnerships. This is really because that signals to us that they're embedded in the communities that they're working in and not working in a silo, because obviously we want to fund organizations that are trying to address broader issues and are, really deeply embedded in the communities that they're serving.
Molly, can I ask a follow-up question on that? Like in
Mhm.
a grant proposal, how might a nonprofit signal that they're part of that sort of mesh network in their funding area or in their local community to be able to get that across? Because I imagine some people are that, but don't know how to signal it.
Yeah,
What's
that's a
your
great
advice?
question. So usually, at least in my experience, the applications that I've seen, there's usually some section where you can talk a bit about your work. I've seen many organizations kind of even just slip that in as a sentence. They mention the name of a collaborative they're in, or they mention ways that they, connect with the individuals that they're serving, and that can be kind of a way to share, how they're embedded within the community that they're working in. Um, and then, I would just say also closely look at what specific questions are being asked of you and how you might be able to kind of slip these kinds of tidbits in. We tend to specifically directly ask about these kinds of things because that's what we're really deeply interested in. But I've seen people really just take every opportunity when they're talking about their work to be thoughtful about really showcasing their collaboration as well as their experience doing the kind of work that we're looking to fund.
That's so helpful. And Molly, I want to, before we go to Caitlin in a moment, I want to tie something you sort of aligned with Danielle on, which is also seen in a lot of our work. And just as a quick aside, so we have a team that works with nonprofits to sort of sign them up for grant assistant or plan giving tools, et cetera. And this has been going on for 9 years now, and so we've learned a ton. And the most successful folks in that role are mostly listening and talking a lot less. And it's so tempting when you start to say, let me just tell you how great FreeWill is. Let me tell you how great my nonprofit is to the funder. And the more you are listening and the more you're saying, thank you, this is what I heard, and this is how our organization might fit into those priorities. Or, you can imagine the experience also saying, this is what I heard. I don't think we're a great fit right now, but I'll be in touch. And that builds such a high level of trust with the funder. If you pull yourself out of it because you think you're not a good fit, and then when another opportunity comes up, they're going to be obviously very attuned because now they trust your judgment. So I just love the thread hearing it from Danielle and from Molly as well. Caitlin, on the flip side, what are the most common mistakes you see in grant proposals? And what's your advice for how nonprofits can better align their applications with your priorities or another funder's priorities?
Thanks, Patrick. Yes, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see is mission misalignment. So if you're trying to square peg round hole, your organization with a funder who has explicit priorities through that open application process, or if they've invited you to apply, answering the questions directly. So in those narrative questions that Molly was speaking about, where you're really being asked specific questions like, who are your partner organizations in the community? Who do you work with? Answering that specifically and succinctly. In my previous role at PhilGram, I was visiting 300 nonprofits a year, going out, meeting with folks in the community, and those were the folks that we had invited from stage 1 to stage 2. And so I'll also say a little bit about the site visit process should you get to that stage. But I just referenced that 300 number just to give you a sense of how many nonprofits folks might be visiting each year. So when you get to that application, either through an invite or through an open call, read through it a couple times, save your responses, have a few folks on your team look at it, proof it, use things like Chat GPT or AI to make sure that you're answering those questions in a way that aligns with the mission. Because again, don't try to be cute and not answer the questions that are asked or reach too much so that it appears that you're trying to make a case for support when maybe there's not one right now. And that's also something I'll say, I'm sure it's very frustrating because when I was an operator at some in DC, I would get no's a lot from our corporate and foundation partners. And oftentimes you can't get feedback from funders if they say no. But what I would say to any organization that emailed me and would ask for feedback as to why, I would always say that it's a not right now. And here are a few quick ways that you could think about improving it. There's resources too. I recently signed up as a reviewer for the unfunded list. I don't know if that's a resource that folks are aware of, but nonprofits can submit proposals that were not successful and have a team of reviewers take a look at them. And so that's another way that you might, again, get some high quality feedback if you're unsuccessful. The reviewers are made up of foundation funders, corporate funders, as well as grant writers and other reviewers. And so just think it's an incredible resource that if you're not taking advantage of, I think it's only $100 a year for a subscription. And I participate in, so I can vet and speak to the quality of it. But back to the site visits, and I'll just say one quick thing on that. Like I said, at PhilGram, I was visiting 300 nonprofits plus a year, and those were folks that were under final consideration. So obviously we started out with a wide funnel through the open letter and then narrowed it in to those 300 to 500 folks. And so I would also say when you have that site visit, treat it like you would a job interview. So put your best foot forward in terms of how you're making the site visit impactful for the foundation staff and the trustees who are joining you. One of the questions I always ask when I'm confirming a site visit then and now is, how do I find your front door? Where do I meet you? Because so many times nonprofits will say, oh yes, you have to go around back and press button 3. And here's where you go if you're taking the train or if you're, parking in the back. So really just rolling out the red carpet and being a hospitable host for your foundation funders, because many times there's a tremendous amount of pre-work that we do prior to those site visits. Then we're traveling to your location and then spending time with you and then traveling to the next site. So really buttoning it up. And also, I will say the biggest factor that I look for when I do site visits is, would this be a place that I would want myself or a loved one to receive services from? And so just making sure that if you have an opportunity for folks to observe your mission in action, your program, your clients, really making sure that you can make that visible for your foundation partners, because that's oftentimes the last feather in your cap, the last interaction that you might have with foundation staff before they present your request to the board for their consideration. So really putting it all out and putting your best foot forward in the application, and then finally in that site visit.
Yeah, it's great information. A bunch of folks asked about the unfunded list, so thank you, Emily and Matilde, for putting the link in.
Thank you.
I assume that we're probably crashing their site right now with so many people clicking on it. So if you don't doesn't go through, go back to that in 20 minutes or so. Kaylin, just some quick follow-up questions on site visits since you raised it. If you're a policy nonprofit or something else where it's a little bit hard to see it in action the way you might see a food bank, do you have any tips for that? And then Donna has what she says is a serious question, which I said she is correct. is do we offer donuts, or do you want us to sort of roll out the red carpet, or
No, when I
tell
say
us?
roll out the red carpet, I just mean putting your best foot forward in terms of how you receive the guest and how you talk about your work. So by no means are we expecting you to feed us. I always say in advance, we don't expect that. And so, because sometimes folks will offer gifts or books or things that are relevant to the work that they're doing. And we always want to make sure that nonprofits are not overextending themselves to us, because we do recognize that it's an intrusion for us to come in and observe your work and interrupt the great programming that you and your staff are leading. So with respect, Patrick, to your question about folks that may not have direct programming that we can observe, I think that's where your success stories really come into play. So when you are meeting with funders and when you have the opportunity to speak to this in the actual grant request, is speaking to those success stories around, this is a policy reform that we've seen change, or as a result of our advocacy efforts, we've now been able to have XYZ impact and outcomes. And so having those really nice and succinct narrative sound bites that you can share with funders vis-a-vis both application forms and then when you're in person in for the site visit, I think those are incredibly impactful if you don't have programming that we can directly observe while we're on site.
Yeah, and we're going to go to Molly in a second, but one thing I want to call out from what Caitlin said is I think that there's a common misconception among many fundees that funder life is not hard work. And I think there are some very small family foundations that are just sort of doling things out. But Caitlin's talking about 300 site visits a year, hopefully in extremely good shoes, right? As she's moving all over the place, and and there's a ton of effort that goes in on the funder side as well, which I think is just not obvious to most people on the fundee side. I think it's just a thing that's missed, and it feels like a real power dynamic where really both people are trying to find a partnership. Molly, let's say a nonprofit doesn't get the grant, right? Can they follow up and ask for feedback? What's the best way to actually ask for that? Because presumably you're getting more, maybe you can't write up feedback for everybody. How should they think about that? Should they feel offended if they ask for feedback and you don't give it? And how do they think about reapplying in the future?
Sure. So again, this is usually highly dependent on the funder, but at Gerstner, we do absolutely welcome follow-up questions. And I think that largely has to do with the fact that, like Caitlin, we are an invitation-only funder. So if you have gotten to the application phase, usually it's a smaller number of organizations applying. So we do typically have more bandwidth to respond to these kinds of questions. And in terms of how to go about it, I did recently have 2 organizations respond to my decision emails by asking if they could have very brief follow-up calls. They stressed it was only going to be 15 minutes max, just to better understand our reasoning behind the decision. And they did frame it as, hopefully this could help them strengthen future proposals, whether that be to us or to other funders. And we also appreciate how much time goes into, preparing and submitting proposals and having any follow-up conversations with us. So when we can, we want to be as helpful and transparent about our process as possible. We've also found that these conversations can be a productive for both sides, and can help us manage expectations and develop relationships with organizations that, as Caitlin said, might not be a fit right now, but could potentially be one in the future, because there's many reasons we may have had to deny a grant. In the 2 cases I mentioned, in one case, I could provide some specific feedback that would hopefully enable them to improve their proposal next time. And I do hope that there is a next time. And in the other, I was able to clarify that the specific grant they applied for just did not seem like a good fit with their what they were looking to do. And that hopefully will save them, more time and resources that they might dedicate to future attempts to get funding from this specific program. Um, as we were saying, not all funders are able to do this. I would say, especially if it's an open RFP, it's likely that because of the volume of people that might be applying, they might not be able to get back to you. Most funders, I would say, typically will say that up front somewhere. So always check the application or materials around that for like a statement on that. And don't be offended if they don't get back to you in that case. But I would say if it's an invitation only process, particularly if you got pretty far into the process, or if it's, more relationship based, I think it rarely hurts to ask, especially if you're upfront about being thoughtful and respectful of the program officer's time, and just acknowledge that they may not be able to share, or respond to every question you might have for whatever reason. It might be internal, policy around sharing the full decision-making process. But I think just coming at this with openness, understanding, and keeping it brief is really helpful.
Molly and Kaylin, is it ever the case that you say not a great fit, but here's another foundation that I'm in touch with that might be a better fit? Does that happen?
I can say for me, yes, whenever possible, we are interested in trying to connect our, people we weren't able to help to other organizations or other opportunities that we're aware of if we think it would be a good fit. And that's one way that, because we're invitation only, we get a lot of recommendations from other funders.
Makes sense.
Yes, and to piggyback off what Molly said, we recognize that we only have, a finite funding pool, and so we try to extend that amount that we can give out each year with knowledge capital. So I always tell folks at the site visit stage, when I'm going out and meeting with our finalists, if there's any introductions I can make, because I recognize that this sitting in this ED shop gives me a tremendous amount of privilege, and I want to be able to extend that to others. So if I can open doors for nonprofits or introduce them. I also offer, any technical expertise that we can with respect to, have you ever talked to this nonprofit? They're doing great work in something that's aligned with you all. Maybe you could partner. Have you gotten funding from these funders? Can I help introduce you? Or has it stalled? Have they been folks to work with? Can I give them any feedback offline that you'd like me to provide anonymously? So again, we really strive in the foundation community. I know that's not just me. I'm sure Molly and many others are in this space as well, that we feel really privileged to sit in this seat. And so we want to make sure that we can, as much as possible, continue to knowledge share and open doors for nonprofits. And that might also be through technical assistance through webinars or other resources that we can equip our nonprofit partners with and learn from them. So what can we have done differently in this process? How can we make this process easier and lighter lift on you all? Because many of us, myself included, have sat on the other side as nonprofit leaders, and we recognize the tremendous amount of work that you put into each funding request. So how can we make you more successful moving forward?
Yeah, super helpful. Danielle, Emily has a question which says, research has shown that nonprofits increase their impact when they are given general operating or unrestricted funding. And you've been able to win this before, both general operating and multi-year, which can be so beneficial. How do you think about asking for something like that? And what are some routes to being able to secure unrestricted funding, which can be so important to any nonprofit?
To be honest, you shouldn't have to work super hard to make the case for this funding. The case really should make itself. And I know that's not always how it works, but you're already doing excellent work, right? And you may have worked with the funder on a smaller pilot or a smaller program, or maybe you're just new. But if you start by highlighting your track record of responsible stewardship, that's a great place to start. General operating support and multi-year funding is not a blank check. It's really a sign of trust that the foundation trusts that you know how to best steward those resources and use those resources. So you can show how you've used past funds to stabilize your team. If you built some sort of infrastructure for long-term sustainability and they're not going to want to lose that. If you use it to weather unexpected crises, you just have to remind them of how much that return on investment is and why they should continue with that vision. You also should emphasize building for sustainability. So funders now, they want to know that their investment is going to create a meaningful and lasting change, from my experience, not just a one-off or one-time project or win. So use those data, the data that you have, the stories that you've collected, the testimonials, as was previously mentioned, from a previous engagement or just the work that you do in general, to connect the dots between your mission and impact. And then you make the transition to being transparent about it, what it's going to take to generate that impact over time and continue that impact over time. You can even, if you feel comfortable, share your financial strategy around like where the support is going, whether it's to fill a revenue gap, it's to seed a new pilot that you want to try out, or to reduce burnout because for staff, those are some of the things that came up when I was thinking through this. But yeah, just showing them, having a little bit of transparency may actually work in your favor in that respect. And overall, funders are just looking for, they want trusted relationships over transactional giving. So positioning your organization as, like I said before, a partner and a peer, and then telling them how that operating support is going to invest in the ecosystem of change and not just a one-off project is really the best way forward.
That's super helpful.
Mhm.
Danielle, also, we've talked a lot about strong proposals and the right way to approach funders. But it sounds like, some funders are really counting on you for guidance. What is your coaching on for funders? How do you make the grant space more equitable, more accessible, knowing
Yeah.
that, there can be all sorts of different advantages or disadvantages that a given nonprofit has?
So I've had a unique experience of working for a $1 billion nonprofit all the way down to a micro nonprofit local, right? Being a founder of a small nonprofit and working within a system that has a lot of resources to dedicate to business development. And I have strong opinions about this. um, some ways that grant makers can make the process more equitable. The first thing I would say is simplify the application process. Um, there are applications that are so long and duplicative, and they're a barrier, especially for smaller community-led organizations. So using plain language, cutting out unnecessary questions, and allowing for, even for a video, I've seen some funders do this, video, voice note options for narrative sections. So allowing for flexible storytelling and not just like long form is one way you could change the game for prospective grantees. I know that a lot of foundations are private and they don't have open calls, but publicly posting those funding opportunities is a way to overcome the barriers, because invite only and word of mouth sometimes reinforce the existing power dynamics that already are there, right? And it feels like gatekeeping. And so having transparency about the timelines, the criteria, and the selection process can really help level the playing field for organizations that don't have that network, right? Paying for people's time is also something I've heard, like offering small stipends for invited proposals or listening sessions or feedback sessions. Time is a resource, and compensating it shows respect and it shows accountability on both sides. Decentering relationships is another possibility. I know connections matter, but there are strong ideas out there that don't require an insider status to make them strong. So sometimes the answer that you're looking for is sitting outside of your network. So broadening that pipeline of ideas and using blind review panels or community grant making models can reduce that bias and expand opportunity for organizations that might otherwise be shut out of the process. We've talked about giving feedback. Small organizations or organizations that are looking to scale, they need the feedback. I mean, in our personal lives or in our work and professional lives, we need feedback to grow, right? So a rejection without context really keeps people in the dark. So I encourage those nonprofits seeking funding to request that feedback, and hopefully more and more philanthropies and foundations will try to give it as much as possible. I think technology might actually help to do that in the future. Some of the technologies we're seeing come up too. Two other things, or one other thing, investing in capacity and not just programs. So equity means recognizing the true cost of doing this work, and general operating support and multi-year funding and trust-based approaches to giving that funding really help organizations to lead on their terms and not just the terms of the foundation. And I think that power balance really needs to be leveled a bit if you're talking about equitable ways to make grants.
Yeah, so helpful. I think one thing I'll add is for funders, and I know there are a bunch of other funders on the call on top of Molly and Kaylin. I think it sounds like these folks do so, but really thinking about the experience of the fundee and what resources they have and what data they might have, et cetera. I was talking to an unnamed funder who I won't name at the moment, focused mostly on sub-Saharan African youth-led organizations. And it was like a 50-page
Mhm.
Application, which by the way, almost all of these leaders are working exclusively on mobile phones. So like, I don't know how sore your thumbs are going to get trying to fill that out, but that's going to be a hard time. And the funder is, Western based, like we're all sitting at desktops, being very comfortable with our large monitors, et cetera. And so really having some empathy there.
Mhm.
We have we'll get to some sort of final thoughts in a moment, but a bunch of questions that I want to sort of rapid fire from the group. Caitlin, you mentioned you do a lot of prep. You did a lot of prep before site visits. Can you just tell us, like, what does that prep look like? What kind of research are you doing?
Absolutely. So for me, it starts at the time. Well, for me right now in the current role I'm in, we're invitation only. So I start that process of prospecting very early on. And so I'm researching always and asking for feedback and thoughts and inquiries from my networks and my networks and from our grantees and from past applicants of any organization that they think that's aligned with our mission of addressing hunger and homelessness, the root causes that is of hunger and homelessness across the US and around the world. So that research really starts even before we're looking at inviting you all to apply. And then once you get to that stage 2 application, because we have a very brief, concise LOI that's driving at how your mission is aligned with our mission, to Danielle's point, very direct, specific questions, lifting hopefully from other text that you have, stock text that you've listed for other funders that you can simply copy and paste and maybe even slightly tweak for us. And then that second round, which gets more into your financial performance. And so that's when I'm really spending a lot of time looking at your most recent budget, your profit and loss statement, last year's budget to actuals, how you performed an audit if you have one. If you are able to complete one, we do know that's costly, so we don't require it. A 990, looking at your board of directors and looking at your past funders. So we always ask for a list of your corporate and foundation funders with dollar amounts from the past few years. And so that's another way that I'm also looking at who to consider inviting to apply is what our other foundation and private philanthropy peers are funding. So oftentimes, because we try to be geographically diverse in the dispersion of the funds that we do have across the US. And so oftentimes I'm looking at community foundations, I'm looking at any publicly available data for a specific geography that I want to invest in. I'm looking at what organizations have operations in that community and who's funding them and at what levels. So always be a friend to your community foundation if you have one, because they're a great resource for us funders who are looking at what organizations are hyper local in an area that maybe we don't have a staff presence or a physical office in. We fund a lot in rural areas and also on native lands, and obviously accessing those communities if you don't have a direct relationship can be challenging. So we go through peer organizations as well. But really, I'm looking at the quality of your operations, how you talk about your staff, the people that you serve, the communities that you're working in. And again, really ensuring that your program is impactful and it ties into our mission. So looking at in real time, what are you doing to meet the needs of those experiencing hunger and homelessness, which is our explicit mission focus. And then what are you doing upstream of that work? And so how does your holistic menu of services and advocacy work to both disrupt what's happening at the current moment, but also innovate to prevent further people from having to engage in your services ultimately over the long term. So we're looking at a number of factors, but it's financial performance, it's community impact, and it's what are you doing that's innovative or disruptive in this space.
Yeah, great questions. Molly, a couple different folks ask, Mark had a question specifically saying, a lot of data about LGBT youth is no longer captured in sort of government data the way it used to be. And other people in different realms say, we're a small org, we might not have the data that the funder is sort of asking for. If you're a smaller organization, how might you think about navigating, obviously it'd be great to have a 10-year longitudinal study for every intervention, et cetera. But for smaller orgs that don't have that, how should they be thinking about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say, we try to be cognizant as I think Danielle was saying, we want to fund a wide range of different types of organizations of different sizes. We try to be respectful of understanding the size and infrastructure of the organization, when we're considering their application, which is why on our applications, we do sometimes ask for things very broad, quantitative data, but we do also really emphasize qualitative data that I think I was referencing earlier, things like case studies or just any sort of, I would say if you don't have a lot of quantitative data, be aware of the type of funder that you are applying to, because certain funders will, that they won't be able to consider anything that does not have if you don't have the infrastructure to kind of secure that data as part of their reporting. So asking about those kinds of requirements upfront, I think could save you a lot of time. But if the funder is, more open to that, to not having that, I really would just recommend highlighting more qualitative stories that really highlight the impact of your work. I would say that's part of what we also have for our reporting process are these kinds of qualitative stories, and that oftentimes is more impactful than the actual hard numbers that we're reporting to our board. So I would just never underestimate, the power of storytelling and being able to capture the impact of your work and sort of, a paragraph of talking about the client experience.
Great. We are almost at time, so I want to give each of you like 60 seconds, which is too short to answer two questions. One is, what do you think the future holds for your work as we go through changing federal landscape and legal landscape and technological and economic landscape? And then secondly, any parting advice you have for this group? And if it goes a little over 60 seconds, you're fine. So Caitlin, if you don't mind, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Danielle and we'll close with Molly.
Okay, great. Thanks, Patrick. Two great questions and fun questions to answer. I think for the future of our work, this is something we've been preparing for. We've obviously lived through a number of administrations and different political decisions that have policy effects on how federal resources are allocated, and then also has economic effects, which affects both the nonprofits' ability to deliver their services and also facing increased demand for their services. So, this sadly isn't something new in terms of the increased pressure on the nonprofit community that hasn't seemed to abate since COVID, and even before then for many communities. So I think for us in the future of our work here in philanthropy, it's to continue to democratize this process. Danielle lifted up a number of great points, as did Molly, with respect to how funders can improve their operations. And here at Launders Trust, we feel very strongly that multi-year Gen Ops unrestricted funding is the best way to invest in the nonprofit community, because it allows them and empowers them to do what they need to do, given that they're the experts in their community. So I think for us, amidst the continued uncertainty and changing political climate that we are facing here in the US and around the world, is that for those of us in philanthropy, we're able to support fantastic nonprofits and to, through that, extend the reach of the work that we're doing into communities around the world. So I view this position that we have as a very privileged position, and I'm excited that we're able to continue supporting you all. What was the second question, Patrick?
Same question is, any general advice, any parting advice?
Okay. Very quickly, I would say just back to basics. So work really hard on your research. And I know I saw in the chat a number of great directories and listings of where you can look to find grant funding opportunities. But spend time on developing those RFP lists with organizations that are aligned with your mission, and then having that stock text built that you can then crop and copy and paste and update as needed to the funder applications, and work on your success stories, having all of that content ready so that you can plug and play as needed for the various funders that you're trying to pitch.
Great. Molly? Go ahead, Molly.
Okay. Okay. I would say, as Caitlin was referencing, this is a really difficult time for all of our partners. And I think, especially with the passing of the One Big Beautiful Bill, over the next few months, we're really going to be focused on staying close to our existing partners to better understand what the full impact of that is going to be on their work, and by extension, the work of their sector, they're working within. So while we, I think, are going to remain really dedicated to the programs that we're currently focused on, I think our work is going to be centered around how can we also be responsive to new and emerging needs within that context, and what role can we best play in supporting our partners and the field as they navigate, I think, new challenges that are going to emerge from this. And what I would say in terms of advice and tips, really just don't underestimate the power of your existing network, both your existing funders, but also any nonprofits that you work with. Again, that's how we find a lot of people that we are currently working with. And I would say, in terms of outreach to your existing funders, even sharing just a short, personalized update about your work or something recent that happened to you can really help you stay top of mind for them. And as they are thinking about how to respond in this moment, it can be a way to stay close. It doesn't have to be long, and honestly probably shouldn't be long, to really have a significant impact. And that can really just help the connection stay close and keep you in mind, have them keep you in mind as they're talking to other funders and may share additional information with you about that.
I love that. Danielle, any parting thoughts from you?
Sure. First, just for the nonprofits, it's a really difficult time. Just taking a moment to acknowledge that, take care of yourselves and take care of your people. Because if you burn out, the need is growing, and we need you more than ever now. So take care of yourselves. Cultivate relationships as a discipline. So not just when you need funding, but all the time. It is a practice, stay flexible and diversify, diversify. That's my thought on where we're at from the nonprofit side of things. And the last 2 points I'll drive home are that the strongest partnerships are not built on insider connections. They're built on alignment and strategic fit. Always remember that. Show up as a peer with the respect that you deserve, not just as an applicant, and be the partner that helps the foundation fulfill their mission more efficiently. And the second thing is equitable outcomes require equitable processes. On the funder side, transparency, feedback, and co-design and inclusiveness aren't just nice to have. They are tools for redistributing the power and really building trust with those community-based organizations that you love and help you to fulfill your mission. That's all.
Amazing. I'm sharing my screen again. I'm going to go through some very quick resources to wrap up. But as I do that, if folks can join me in thanking Molly, Danielle, and Kaylin, this was truly extraordinary. So thank you so, so, so much. My colleague Phoebe, who also deserves a ton of thanks, as does my colleague Kara for putting this together and doing all the prep work, as you can imagine. Danielle, Molly, Kaylin did not just show up here. They spent a lot of time thinking about this in advance to give you the best possible experience. So thank you so much. My colleague Phoebe is dropping a survey in the chat. That will be there as well. First things first is we are giving away this book, Meditations for Mortals. You will love it. Everyone that's read it has really appreciated it. Second thing, on this Thursday in 2 days, we are doing a session on Grant Assistant. If you're interested in new technology to use AI to both respond to and to find perfect fit grants, feel free to join that. It'll be about half an hour. We'll be quick. And then next Tuesday, as was mentioned, there's a lot going on in the world. We are going to do a deep dive on what the new tax bill means for charitable giving and what fundraisers should do next. So this is a sort of rapid response emergency session for folks. We've heard that people are really hungry for more information here. So this will be next Tuesday, July 15th at noon Eastern, same time, same place. So what happened in the mega bill? What should you take away? How it might shape donor behavior and what should you actually do? Feel free to make a note in the survey to save your spot there. These are the sort of final components. Danielle, Molly, Caitlin, if folks want to connect with you, what's the best way to do so? Do you have a LinkedIn? Should they find you on LinkedIn? Something else?
LinkedIn's great. I can put my
Perfect.
link in the chat. Same.
Feel free to do this. I'm sure that you're seeing the outpouring of gratitude in this, but thanks to you all again. But then as importantly, thanks everyone who joined here today. Obviously, you are busy with incredibly important missions, and choosing to spend some time with us to improve your careers and improving the outcomes for your programs is incredibly important, and we're very, very grateful for it.